They thought they had you figured out, boxed, labeled, predictable, smiling while they studied the mask you let them see. But tonight, the mask slips, not by accident, by choice. The calm side steps back, and the other half walks in. Sharp, focused, unapologetic. Watch their confidence crack. Watch their logic panic. Because when people realize you were holding back, their minds don't just change, they collapse. They only knew the version you allowed, because people don't actually want truth. They want comfort. They want the version of you that fits neatly into their expectations, the one that doesn't disturb their sense of superiority. So you gave them that version. Calm, agreeable, predictable. You watched them relax around you, watched them grow bold, watched them start speaking louder, acting smarter, assuming control. And you let it happen. Not because you couldn't stop it, but because you didn't need to. You understood something they never will. Perception is a leash, and you were holding it the whole time. They mistook your restraint for limitation, your patience for fear, your silence for emptiness. They laughed a little too freely, underestimated a little too confidently, judged a little too casually. And every single time, you noticed. You cataloged the looks, the tone shifts, the subtle disrespect wrapped in fake politeness. You saw who they became when they thought you were harmless. That's the funny part. People always reveal themselves when they believe they're safe. And you made them feel very safe. You played the role perfectly. You nodded when they spoke nonsense. You stepped back when you could have stepped forward. You let them take credit, take space, take comfort. Not because you were small, but because you were studying the room. You were learning their rhythm, their ego, their blind spots. You were watching how quickly they assumed power once they thought you didn't have any. And the more they assumed, the deeper they buried themselves. They never questioned why you stayed quiet. Never asked why you never reacted. Never wondered why someone so observant chose to blend into the background. They didn't realize silence can be a weapon when used correctly. That composure can be camouflage. That sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone stopped watching. So when the shift happens, when the other half shows up, it feels unreal to them, like a glitch in reality, because in their minds you were already categorized, already dismissed, already solved. And now the version they thought they knew no longer exists. The voice is sharper. The eyes don't flinch. The energy changes. Suddenly you're not reacting. You're directing. Suddenly they're the ones unsure, recalculating, scrambling to understand how they missed it. That moment of confusion. That's the price of underestimating someone who chose to be underestimated. They weren't wrong about what they saw. They were wrong about thinking it was all there was. You didn't hide your other half out of fear. You concealed it out of precision, because revealing everything too early ruins the impact. Because shock only works once. Because power feels heavier when it's revealed after being denied for so long. They knew the version you allowed because that version was bait. and they swallowed it without hesitation, smiling, confident, unaware that the real you was standing just behind the curtain, listening, waiting, letting them get comfortable enough to forget that comfort can be revoked at any moment. The mask was strategy, not weakness. You didn't wear it because you were afraid to be seen. You wore it because you understood how people react to what they think they understand. A mask simplifies you in their minds. It makes you manageable. And when people believe they've measured you, they stop questioning you. That's when they slip. That's when they talk too freely, act too boldly, assume too much. You let them. You watched them relax into their assumptions while you stayed 3 steps ahead, smiling just enough to keep them comfortable. They confuse loudness with strength, chaos with power, exposure with authenticity. You learned early that revealing everything is the fastest way to lose control. So you edited yourself. You softened the edges. You played smaller than you were, not to survive, but to observe. You noticed how quickly they underestimated the quiet version of you, how easily they dismissed restraint as incapacity. And you took notes. Every careless comment, every sideways look, every moment they spoke to you like you were beneath them. The mask absorbed it all, while the real you stayed untouched. Behind that calm exterior, calculation never stopped. You measured timing. You studied reactions. You understood who needed attention and who craved dominance. You learned which egos were fragile and which were inflated beyond reason. The mask gave you access. It made you invisible enough to move freely, close enough to hear the truth people never intend to say out loud. Because no one guards themselves around someone they believe isn't a threat. And you made sure they never saw you as one. They thought you were holding back because you didn't have more. They didn't realize you were holding back because you had too much. Too much awareness, too much control, too much patience to waste it on impulsive displays. You understood that power revealed too early invites resistance. Power revealed too late invites fear. So you waited. You let the mask do its job. You let it mislead, disarm, and distract while you built leverage quietly. The funny thing about masks is that people forget they exist. They start believing the performance is the person. They grow careless. They test boundaries. They speak with confidence that isn't earned. And every time they did, they reinforced the strategy. Because the more they underestimated you, the greater the contrast would be when the mask finally came off. Contrast is shock. Shock is control. When the shift happens, it feels violent to them, not because you changed, but because their understanding collapses all at once. The voice steadies. The posture changes. The hesitation disappears, and suddenly the person they thought they knew is gone. In its place stands someone who sees too much, understands too well, and no longer needs to pretend. That's when they realize the mask wasn't hiding weakness. It was hiding timing. And timing is everything when you're about to turn the room upside down. Silence trained their arrogance because people grow careless when nothing challenges them. When you don't interrupt, don't correct, don't react, they assume agreement. They assume submission. They assume you're absent, unaware, irrelevant. And arrogance feeds on that assumption like a parasite. You gave them quiet, and they filled it with their own ego. They talked more. They boasted. They explained things you already understood. They started believing they were the smartest presence in the room, the strongest voice, the unquestioned authority. You didn't stop them. You let silence do what confrontation never could. Expose who they really were. Every pause you held gave them permission to overstep. Every calm response encouraged them to go further. They mistook your composure for insecurity, your listening for ignorance. They leaned in closer, lowered their guard, revealed intentions they would have hidden from someone they respected. That's the beauty of silence. It invites people to underestimate you while handing you all the information you need. You heard their plans before they were finalized. You understood their weaknesses before they noticed yours. You watched them grow louder, bolder, more reckless, all because you refused to announce yourself. Arrogance doesn't arrive suddenly. It's trained, conditioned, rewarded, and your silence was the training ground. They learned that nothing happened when they dismissed you. Nothing changed when they spoke over you. Nothing pushed back when they assumed control. So they escalated. They crossed lines. They grew comfortable in disrespect. They stopped checking themselves. And comfort is where mistakes breed. People at ease reveal patterns. People unchallenged repeat themselves. People who feel superior stop adapting. You stayed still while they grew predictable. You stayed quiet while they exposed their habits, their tells, their fragile spots. You noticed how they reacted to pressure, how they craved validation, how easily they panicked when attention shifted away from them. Silence sharpened your vision. While they were performing, you were dissecting. While they were posturing, you were positioning. And they never sensed the shift, because silence feels harmless to those who confuse noise with power. They laughed a little louder around you. They spoke a little freer. They underestimated consequences because none arrived immediately. They forgot that silence doesn't mean absence. It means observation. They didn't realize you were allowing their arrogance to grow unchecked for a reason. Arrogance blinds. It slows reaction time. It makes people believe they're untouchable, and you let them believe it fully. When someone finally grows bold enough to think they're untouchable, they stop watching their surroundings. They stop questioning motives. They stop preparing for resistance. And that's when silence stops being passive and starts being dangerous. Because when you finally speak, when you finally move, when you finally reveal intent, it doesn't feel like opposition to them. It feels like betrayal by reality itself. Their arrogance collapses under the weight of how wrong they were. Not because you changed, but because silence gave them enough rope to tie themselves into a story where you never mattered, a story they believed until the moment it unraveled in front of them. The other half is calculated, not chaotic, and that's what terrifies them the most. They expect explosions, tantrums, emotional outbursts, something loud enough to justify dismissing you. Chaos is easy to label, easy to mock, easy to prepare for, but calculation slips past defenses unnoticed. You don't rush. You don't react on impulse. You let moments breathe while everyone else panics for control. They think unpredictability is power, but real power is precision. And you've been sharpening it quietly. They never saw the planning because planning doesn't announce itself. It looks like patience. It sounds like restraint. It feels like nothing at all. While they were busy reacting to every slight, every challenge, every imaginary threat, you were mapping outcomes, measuring consequences, testing limits without crossing them. You understood that emotion clouds judgment, and you refused to let your moves be dictated by how you felt in the moment. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you dangerous. They mistook your calm for emptiness. They thought the absence of noise meant the absence of intent. They didn't realize that, while they were burning energy on appearances, you were conserving yours, watching patterns repeat, watching egos inflate, watching alliances form and fracture. Every interaction fed the calculation. Every word they spoke without thinking gave you leverage. You weren't reacting because you were already ahead of the reaction. Chaos destroys itself. Calculation builds pressure. Slow, controlled, relentless. You didn't need to dominate the room to control it. You didn't need to raise your voice to shift the balance. You let them feel comfortable, believing you were passive while you adjusted variables they didn't even know existed. That's the part they never anticipate. The idea that someone can be fully aware, fully capable, and still choose restraint as a weapon. When the other half finally surfaces, it doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives certain. The movements are minimal. The words are measured. The timing is exact. And that's when they realize they misread everything. Because chaos announces itself before it strikes. Calculation waits until escape routes disappear. They try to laugh it off at first, tell themselves you're bluffing, that this version of you won't last. But calculation doesn't seek validation. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission. They feel the shift before they understand it. Conversations change tone. Authority rearranges itself without discussion. The room starts responding to you differently, and they can't explain why. That's when panic sets in. Not loud panic, quiet panic. The kind that tightens the chest and scrambles thought. Because they're not dealing with emotion anymore. They're dealing with intent. You didn't become this way overnight. The other half was always there, watching, learning, refining. You just didn't unleash it recklessly. You waited until calculation outweighed risk. Until silence gathered enough data. Until their confidence outpaced their awareness. That's why it feels sudden to them. That's why it feels unfair. They wanted chaos they could dismiss, but what they're facing now is something they can't outtalk, outmaneuver, or intimidate because every move you make is deliberate. every pause intentional, every action placed exactly where it does the most damage without ever looking like damage at all. Their shock is proof of your control, because surprise only exists when someone believes they were in charge. They thought they understood the rules, the hierarchy, the limits of the game. They believed they were operating from the highest position, making the boldest moves, pulling the invisible strings. And then you shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to fracture their certainty. Shock didn't come from your action alone. It came from the realization that their confidence was built on an illusion you allowed to exist. People hate discovering that their sense of superiority was borrowed time. They replay past moments in their head, searching for signs they missed, warnings they ignored. They start questioning every interaction, every assumption, every careless thought they had about you. That mental rewind is panic disguised as curiosity. Because if they were wrong about you, what else were they wrong about? And that question eats at them quietly, relentlessly. They expected resistance when you moved. Pushback, chaos, emotional reactions they could label and dismiss. Instead, they got precision, calm execution, intent without explanation. That's what freezes them. Because shock isn't loud. It's paralyzing. Their mind stutters trying to reconcile the version of you they minimized with the version standing in front of them now. And the gap between those two realities is where your control lies. Control isn't dominance. It's timing. It's knowing when to stay still long enough for someone to overestimate themselves. You watched their confidence grow unchecked. You watched them speak with authority they didn't earn. You watched them assume leadership simply because no one challenged them, and you let it continue because confidence without awareness becomes fragile. The higher it rises, the harder it collapses. Their shock is evidence that you never needed to announce yourself. If you had, they would have adjusted, prepared, defended. But you let them believe the environment was safe. You let them believe you were predictable. You let them believe they were untouchable. And when that belief shattered, it wasn't your strength that hurt them. It was their own blindness. They start scrambling for explanations. Maybe you changed. Maybe something happened to you. Maybe this is temporary. They need it to be temporary because accepting that you were always capable means accepting that they misjudged you from the start. And ego doesn't survive that realization easily. Ego prefers excuses over accountability. You don't need to celebrate their shock. You don't even need to acknowledge it. Control doesn't require recognition. The silence after the shift is louder than any speech you could give. The way conversations suddenly pause when you speak. The way decisions start orbiting around your presence without you demanding them to. That's control settling into place. They feel exposed, outplayed, unsteady, because shock strips people of their script. It forces them into improvisation, and most people are terrible at that. They hesitate. They second guess. They watch you more closely now, trying to predict your next move. unaware that the real victory already happened the moment they realized they never saw you coming. Revelation changes the power balance, because power was never where they thought it was. It was never in volume, status, or visibility. It was in control of information, perception, and timing. The moment you reveal what was hidden, the entire structure they relied on tilts. Not slowly, instantly. Because power isn't transferred through permission, it's seized through realization. And realization hits harder than force ever could. They were comfortable before the reveal, comfortable believing the hierarchy was fixed, comfortable believing roles were permanent, comfortable believing you existed somewhere beneath their influence. That comfort was their leverage, and the revelation destroys it in a single breath. Suddenly, the ground they were standing on feels unstable. Suddenly, the rules feel unclear. Suddenly, they're unsure where they rank in a system they thought they mastered. That confusion isn't weakness. It's displacement. When the other half steps into the light, it doesn't just add strength to you, it subtracts certainty from them. They lose their reference point. The old version of you no longer works as a comparison. Their past behavior toward you becomes questionable. Their decisions start looking reckless in hindsight. They realize they miscalculated the entire board, and now every move they made is open to re-evaluation. That's when the balance shifts. Not because you demand authority, but because they no longer trust their own judgment. Revelation forces recalibration. They start watching you differently, listening more carefully, measuring their words, adjusting their posture. The same people who once overlooked you now hesitate before speaking. The same people who once led now wait. And the funny thing is, you didn't ask for any of it. Power rearranges itself naturally around clarity. Once people know what you're capable of, they adapt or fall behind. They feel exposed because revelation doesn't just show who you are. It shows who they were while misjudging you. It highlights their arrogance, their assumptions, their lack of depth, and that exposure is humiliating, not publicly, but internally, because they can't undo the past interactions. They can't take back the moments they underestimated you. They can only sit with the knowledge that the balance they relied on was artificial. Revelation doesn't scream. It doesn't threaten. It simply exists. And existence is enough. Once the truth is visible, denial becomes effort, and effort reveals fear. They may try to reassert control, joke it away, downplay the shift, but their behavior betrays them. They're more cautious now, more reactive, less sure. Because revelation doesn't remove their power, it forces them to share space with yours. The balance changes not because you overpower them, but because you equalize the field they thought was uneven in their favor. And equality terrifies those who relied on imbalance to feel superior. They don't know how to operate without advantage. They don't know how to lead without illusion. They don't know how to dominate when someone sees through the structure. You didn't gain power in the moment of revelation. You revealed it. And once revealed, It can't be unseen. Every interaction from that point forward is filtered through awareness. Every move they make is slower. Every decision heavier. Because they're no longer playing against a version they invented. They're facing the full reality they helped create by underestimating you.